thank you guys for being here. It's really an honor to be here in front of you guys, and the energy is really positive. I don't get too hippy-dippy on you, but this is one of the most positive rooms I've been in since I've been in Amsterdam, so thank you. It's not saying Amsterdam's negative. Kick me out if I'm not careful. All right. So what I want to talk to you today about is my relationship with games, and what does a game designer do? It's a question I get all the time when people find out that I'm a game designer, and it's, yeah, we're going to go into that. And oftentimes people have misunderstandings about what it is, but they also want to know, how do I get involved in games? So I'm going to go over that a little bit too. So what is a game designer? So people think, oh, I get it. You make visual art, because like graphic design, right? And I'm like, well, no, not exactly. That's not, we have artists that do that. That's not what a game designer does, but I do use my visual skills to communicate ideas about how a game should work, but I'm not the artist. But I did also start as an artist, which also confuses people. Oh, okay, so then you must be a coder. You're a hacker, right? You write code. No, sorry, wrong again. I write the script okay, but I'm no programming genius. Like most of the games I've worked on in big studios, people have computer science degrees from MIT and Harvard, and they're way better at that than me. I just went to art school. I'm just kind of a guy who has more of a creative. I can code if I have to, but I'm not the most efficient at it. Okay, so then you must be like the manager. You like tell the coders and the artists what to make, right? And it's like, well, we have producers who are managers. I'm not really the manager. I'm another thing that communicates other aspects of how to make a game. So I'm going to talk to you guys about how that is. And by this time, people are just like, I give up. I don't know what you're trying to tell me. I often like try to go to analogies, and it just doesn't work. As kind of a joke, it's like, well, what's a chef? Oh, I get it. You operate the oven, right? It's like, well, no, that's not really what I do as a chef. Oh, so you're a cook. Well, that doesn't quite capture what a chef does. Okay, so you manage the kitchen and the cooks? No, that's also not what a chef does, right? And by this time, if somebody doesn't understand what a chef is, they're really frustrated. So to tell you what a game designer is, I'm going to start with how I got into game design and what my background is. So I was born and raised in Colorado. I live in Amsterdam now. I've been here for just about a year, a little over a year. And I'm a creator. I was born loving to create things and explore things. I was a little bit of a scientist. I like to experiment and build prototypes and kites and flying things, and so I like to make stuff. But I also like to draw, and I like to look at art, and I love music. So I'm a fan of other people's creations, and that's kind of how we all start out, right? Like we're really in awe of what other people make. And making games has been my career for 19 years now, and I've had many different roles during my career, which is a little bit unusual for someone in game development. Usually somebody's either a programmer or an artist or a producer, and sometimes they make one or two changes, and I've had like 4 or 5 different roles that I'll go into. So my early influences, I was really interested in art that expressed something that had a playfulness to it, something that like really drew you in and made you want to look at it for longer. So Escher was a huge inspiration for me. I love going to Den Haag and seeing Escher and Nicolais. I love looking at all that stuff. And Da Vinci was somebody who was interesting to me because he was great at aesthetically creating beautiful looking things, but he also loved to deconstruct the world and think of it from a system standpoint. And what is it that makes these things work? And so he was sort of a scientist and an artist at the same time. And that was really interesting to me because just aesthetics alone wasn't compelling enough early on. So my parents were school teachers, and most American children, you may or may not know this, but had access to Apple IIs because Apple was really generous. They gave all the public schools Apple IIs in the 80s and 70s. And so we had these, then they were a little bit antiquated, but we had Apple IIs when I was in school, and my dad would bring one home on the weekend. So I got to play games on the Apple II mostly, but I also learned to do a little bit of scripting on it too. One of the coolest games I really liked was called Aztec. It was kind of an Indiana Jones game. It was a side scroller. This picture doesn't really capture the actual experience was much less interesting than this picture, actually. And Karateka is another game. I recently, you can get this on the iPhone now, actually, and it doesn't quite hold up as much, but at the time it was pretty fun. It was an interesting game. And then I got into console games, of course. We couldn't afford a computer, but we could afford consoles, and so My friend had an Atari, and I think my first console was a Sega Master System. I had a choice to get either a Nintendo Entertainment System or a Sega Master System, and I chose the Sega Master System because it had better graphics, and that was a bad choice. The games were okay, but there was no Mario. I didn't get to play all these games. There was like one guy at school that had a Sega, so we could trade games with him, but everybody else was talking about Zelda and Mario, and I missed the boat on that one, so yeah. My other early influences were like space exploration, rocketry. I have rocketry in my blood. My grandfather was one of the early rocket scientists, worked with James Goddard, Robert Goddard, excuse me, on some of the early American space and rocket programs. Indiana Jones, of course, I loved that when I was a kid in the 80s. Scientists like Stephen Hawking talking about the cosmos, and dinosaurs, of course, I loved. So I thought maybe I want to be an artist, but I also kind of want to be an astronaut, archaeologist. Can I do it all? And so that's sort of been the theme of my life, is I kind of want to do it all. So I think that's why I've had so many different roles. And I've been fortunate to be able to do that. My first early digital tools, my parents finally got me my own computer when I was about 12, and we got an Apple II GS, which was an okay computer for the time. I used a program called Deluxe Paint, which was made by a new company that was not making games back then, called Electronic Arts. And so before they made games, they made kind of these art tools for computers. And ironically, Electronic Arts is going to be a thread throughout this talk. But anyway, I didn't think that I could really make a career out of being a digital artist. I thought I would have to become a programmer to get really good at it, and I just didn't feel like I had the know-how to be a programmer. So I decided where I'm going to go is more towards the creative side of things. And so I decided I was going to be a fine arts major and follow the footsteps of Jackson Pollock and Picasso. I was very ambitious. So, of course, when you're in college and you're a young adult, you tend to have, you start to get a rebellious streak. You start to like push the edges of what civilization is all about in civil discourse. And so I started finding that there were aspects of the subculture that I was really interested in. So I enjoyed going to punk shows, playing in punk bands, reading really interesting and outside the circle kind of poetry and writing and things like that. And this also kind of brought up in me this notion that why am I being a part of this system where I'm going to get this 4-year degree that teaches me how to splatter paint on a canvas? And is that something I really want to spend 4 years doing just to have such a narrow kind of degree at the end of it? For better or for worse, I decided to drop out. I think it was for the better, actually, because I was not motivated. I wasn't going to class very much. I just wasn't really ready for an education. And it was a waste of my time. It was a waste of my parents' money and the state's money and my own future money. So I decided to drop out. I worked in some very interesting manual labor type things, like loading boxes onto trucks. And I worked at a bar. I worked at a really scary biker bar where I had to break up fights all the time. I'm a large person, I'm a big guy, but I'm not really a fighter, and I didn't really enjoy breaking up fights, so that didn't last very long. But yeah, there was a fight like every night. Like, come on, guys. It's almost like I just should have rebranded it as like an MMA. It was before and I lived in Mexico for a time. I studied a little bit of Spanish, and I lived in the city where Diego Rivera was born, a Mexican muralist. And so I got a lot of inspiration, and it's also where I first kind of got my taste for travel and for exploring and being open to other cultures and other ideas. It sounds strange to you probably, but not all Americans are as open to other parts of the world and learning from other cultures as maybe some of us are. So, so while I was like going in this kind of this wilderness exploring, I had a personal epiphany. I read about a guy who was a 3D computer graphics artist, and he worked in video games, and he worked in film, and he got to use his creativity, and he merged that with an understanding of technology and science and mathematics to make some really cool graphics. And I was like, whoa, so you can be an artist and work in video games? Because at this point, I hadn't made that connection. I thought you had to be a coder to work in video games. And so I realized that maybe there was a way that I could make some of these games, the games that I grew up playing, and maybe I could help kind of see where the future lied. I had a vision for how games could be, and so I got very excited, and I was very passionate. And so I decided I had to do it. And so I went to art school, and this time I got way better grades. I went to class, which helped, and I learned about the basics again. So I learned about color theory. I was already pretty good at drawing, but I sharpened my skills, like drawing and typography. I learned new digital tools, which is crucial. So at the time, I learned 3D Studio Max, and Photoshop and some other tools, of course, the whole Adobe suite. But the good thing about that was I was around people who had the same kind of thinking as me, and so I felt very driven. And I think that passion, if I'm not passionate about something, I just don't do, none of us put as much effort into it as we could if we were super driven. So this I was really driven for, so I did very well. And I applied for an internship with the help of my, my career counselor who we had at the college. I was in her office like every week being like, hey, are there any internships? Hey, are there any internships? Because I really wanted to get, start a career in games. And she said, well, there's this internship at Electronic Arts. And I was like, oh, Electronic Arts, they're like the big corporate company, and they make Madden, they make a bunch of like football games, and it's kind of, I want to work on more artsy stuff, you know? And she said, well, just try it. And I was like, also, it's like huge. Like, what are the chances that I'm actually going to get it? Like, everybody's probably applying for this art internship. And she said, just apply. The chances, think about it, even if 1,000 people apply, the chances of you getting in is better than winning the lottery. Okay. So I kind of took it as like, yeah, I'll try. I put in my best effort, and I got the internship. They gave me a test. They had me email a little essay, and then they had me make a 3D model of an ambulance in under, I think it was 80 polygons is what I'm trying to remember. One time I made a gas station out of 40 polygons, which is pretty cool. So a polygon, in case you don't know, are these little squares. It's like, so nowadays, an ambulance in a game like this would be hundreds of polygons probably, but back then the hardware wasn't as good, so you got to make a little bit, you got to make some interesting compromises. So the reason I got the internship, I think I worked really fast and I followed the directions precisely. The other applicants took weeks. I got mine done over the weekend because I really wanted it. So I flew from my home state of Colorado. Someone earlier was asking me where the hell's Colorado. That's where it is. And I flew out to San Francisco for my internship at Electronic Arts, at the EA Academy it was called. I got to work on a game called Road Rash, which is a very intellectual game where you ride a motorcycle and you knock other people off of their motorcycles with bats and chains and whatever you can find.
Getting back to your roots.
Yeah, that's kind of from the biker bar. That's where I made that connection. So yeah, I had some personal experience with these guys. And so I worked on the HUD elements, the UI, and I made some 3D models like a gas station that would come, you'd whiz by and crash into. Then I got offered a full-time position, and this basically started my career in games. I went back to school and finished my degree in Colorado, and then they offered me a full-time position. I had 2 internships, 2 summers in a row. So I had my first one my second year, and I had my second one my third year. Then I graduated and got my degree and got offered the full-time position. So at EA, I worked on a bunch of James Bond games. I got so sick of James Bond, like the themes, so I kind of twitch when I hear it. Because you have to play, I was a level designer, so I had to play the game all the time to test it out. And by the way, that's my other point, is that when I was at EA, they gave me the opportunity to move from just being a guy that makes the objects that are in the game to actually designing what the experience is for the player. So I would do the layout of where the player would go and where bad guys would spawn and come out at you, how to create the balance between feeling challenged in a game and feeling frustrated by it. That's really one of the things that a game designer does. And while I was at EA, I also got to work on The Sims 2, which is a very different game from all the games I'd worked on before. Had kind of a different audience. I'm sure you guys are familiar with The Sims. I worked as a producer on The Sims and a feature producer, and that was a really cool role. Then I left EA. I went and I worked on Tomb Raider, which is one of my favorite games from when I was in college. I'd been at EA for 5 years, and I decided I really wanted to see how other game companies work and kind of get away from the big monolith that was EA then. Maybe still is, but so working at a small studio called Crystal Dynamics was the first time that Tomb Raider was made in America. Before that, it was made in England, and it was really not doing very well. I think this was the 7th Tomb Raider, and the one before it got a Metacritic rating. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's like out of 100, it got like 32. And so this one that I worked on, we brought it back. We got like 85, I think. So it was really cool to be able to do that. So yeah, so I worked in these mainstream big AAA console games, and it was different then than it is now, because you had to put everything onto this disk and send it to the player, and then you could never update it. It was done. And then you could go on vacation and like be like, oh, it's all done. And nowadays we make games and we distribute them online, and then the players are like, okay, when are you gonna make new updates? And so it like never ends when you release a game. Really the hard work begins once you release the game. So it can be, you have to really schedule your your time around that. But anyway, so this whole AAA thing was cool, but there were some downsides to it. I was working at big companies that had big business structures. One of the good things was I got to move from being an artist into level design. This is like the level design tool that I used. You can see it, you'd lay out different nodes and decide where the player would go. It's kind of hard to see on the screen, but that was the point of that. But you would also deal with these kind of guys. Guys that are like, I don't really know what you do, art man, creative person, just make a great game and I'm gonna sell it. And sometimes you'd have conflicts with them about the vision for what the product would be. Oftentimes they would tell you what the vision for the product would be, and then you were supposed to just match their vision. So for me, I kind of lost a sense of creative freedom in this environment, so I was very eager to kind of move away from that. You'd get people saying, just make it more funner. They would say things that really were difficult to quantify, and they would want to try to quantify the unquantifiable, which is a very interesting conversation to have with someone, especially if you're not like communicating clearly. There's no like equal footing in terms of communication. So something I realized was that there's like a group of people who aren't constrained by these corporate structures, who are just making games for the hell of it, and they don't care if it makes money. They would like it to, but they're like doing experiments and they're trying new things. And this is something that really appealed to me. And so I kind of started to drift away from like the big, more corporate type places. I got a lot of benefit from that. I learned a lot. But I started to drift away and work on smaller projects that had not so many corporate constraints, I guess. So I got to work on some really interesting games. I even made some games all by myself. So I learned how to do some programming. I was already an artist and a level designer and a game designer. And yeah, I did some of these myself. One of the games that I'm really excited about, that I want to tell you about, is this one up here. It's called Space Movers. It was a Facebook game, and it's no longer, you're not able to play it anymore. But one of the things we did with it was, the plot for the game was that you were an alien race that was helping repopulate Earth with resources after Earth had been destroyed by mankind. And so you were trying to help them like fix the planet after they destroyed it environmentally. So what we decided to do was see if we could tie in an element with the Arbor Day Foundation so that when players played it, a portion of our proceeds that we got from people playing the game could go and actually make the Earth better. They would plant trees. So I think for every, I don't remember how much it was, but I think we planted over 10,000 trees from this game after like 3 months of it being out. So it was really cool to work on a game that made the world a better place. And that's something that I think we could do more of. So this basically represents that I really like to see the potential in things. For me, the potentiality is something that I really embrace. And I think if you're in a small place, the good thing about that is that you have a ton of potential for growth. And so you should embrace that. I also started a community. I went back to Colorado, and I wanted to work as an indie developer, but I didn't have a lot of people to make connections with. So I created a club called the Colorado Independent Game Developers Association. And it started out as 9 people in a cafe, and we shared what games we were working on. Some of these people weren't working on their own games, they were working at game companies, and they were like, hey, I kind of want to do what you do. And so we just communicated about like, what does it take to like make your own game? And now, when I left, it got up to like 500 people, and now they're in the thousands of participants, and they meet every other week in different parts of the state. And I'm pretty proud that I was the founder of that, and that's grown into a resource that creatives have who want to learn how to make games, who maybe have never gotten formal training in making games. From that, I got some notoriety, and I was invited to teach college, even though I didn't have a master's degree. I only had a bachelor's degree. At a school called Champlain College, was a university. They had a 4-year degree, and they let me be an assistant professor, and that was really cool. So I was able to kind of take my knowledge to the next level and teach young people who want to learn how to make video games, how to make them. So I had the street cred. I'd worked at EA and Activision and all these different studios. I worked at Tomb Raider, names that people recognize, and that kind of gives you a little bit of an in with young people because they've heard of that stuff, so they trust what you're saying a little bit more sometimes. So that was really fun and very rewarding, and in fact I'm flying back next week to see some of my students graduate, that I promised I would come back and see them graduate. I left them with some of my students had tears in their eyes when I told them I was going to Amsterdam. Well, actually, anyway. I promised them I would come back and watch them graduate, so I'm fulfilling that promise. I'm flying back during King's Day. Yeah. Sorry, I'm missing King's Day. How disrespectful. All right. So now you're asking, okay, so you started as an artist and you became a level designer, game designer, whatever. So what exactly is a game designer? So let's disassemble game design, and I'm going to try to explain it to you. You could teach a whole college course on game design. And what I want to try to communicate to you is that there are many different facets to game design that make it truly infinitely interesting. I think that, I was talking to someone earlier, I think game design is more like a practice, like a martial arts, that you can start to master more and more as you practice it, but it's not something you just teach somebody and they've learned it all and they're done. It's a career where you continually learn new things, and every single aspect of knowledge can apply to game design. So I'm going to try to kind of show you a few aspects, some of the major aspects that contribute to good game design. So people take game design for granted because they don't necessarily see it. They see the graphics, they can see when there's a bug, so they know that there's programming involved, but you don't really know that a game is designed well unless you're playing a bad one. So you just take good game design for granted. Art and programming, producers, they're all needed to make a game, but you still need that, what is it that makes the game a game? So game design is what makes just a mere piece of software that functions into an experience. So what we do is we try to create an experience for the players. It has to be engaging. That means you have to right away enjoy what you're doing and not get bored and switch to something else. We design loops. There's a couple different kinds of loops. The two loops I want to talk about real briefly are feedback loops, and that's basically like Pavlovian or B.F. Skinner type loops, where it's like, yes, you did the right thing. We're gonna reward you for that. No, you did the wrong thing. You shouldn't do that. And here's how we let you know. So an example is like, yeah, you go in the right direction and you hear music change, or the scene changes, or you progress in the game. If you go in the wrong direction, maybe a door closes behind you, or you don't take cover when you should, and so you get shot and the screen flashes red. Those are the ways we communicate to the player about whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing in a game. The other kind of loop is an experience loop, which is basically saying, what is my session? So I come into an experience, what's my goal, and what's the conclusion, and then do I do that again, or do I do something else? Creating those like moments where they can take breaks and have the pacing for the game be correct. But games are about play, right? And play is as meaningful as anything. Even animals play. I don't know if you guys have seen videos of, like, I saw a swan, I think it was when I was in Bern. I saw a swan that was like a little waterfall, and it just loved to like go up to where the waterfall was, and then it would kind of surf the waterfall down, and then it would kind of like, it'd like flop its wings and then go back up and like, and it was just playing, like, holy cow, it's so crazy. So animals play too, and we play, and it's natural. And it's too often that in our society we think of play as something that's trivial or trite, or it's a waste of our time, when really play is a great way to learn and enjoy life. We have all these sayings like, stop playing and get back to work, right? Work can be play. You can learn a lot from play. We've all started playing from a very young age. Blocks, for example. So these are two different kinds of blocks, right? And so this kind of blocks is like a toy, and these kind of blocks is a game. And so what makes Tetris a game compared to just playing with colored blocks? And what it comes down to is something that might be a little bit paradoxical. That's what this next slide is about. So restrictions and rules, you probably can't read that very well, but it says restrictions and rules create freedom and joy. So when you have rules, you can actually make a game more fun, because Tetris has rules where blocks are just open-ended. You can have fun doing them, but it's not a game. Feedback loops that both reward and punish. So you need to be able to tell people they're doing something well and not so well, or the wrong thing. And so these are the kinds of dichotomies that we face as game designers. So game design requires paradox, and this is just a few examples of them, but the weird thing is when we think philosophically about game design and we face issues, we find them all the time. And sometimes the answers are to keep things, ooh, that didn't work at all. This is supposed to be a yin-yang symbol. It's very zen, though, I guess. But we find these all the time, and that's what I really love about games. Yeah, we find it constantly, and so it becomes your job to gracefully utilize and deal with these paradoxes and embrace them and find out how you can make them work for you instead of against you. So sometimes it's a matter of putting things in balance, because a good games have two elements almost every game has. There's a luck element and there's a strategic element. And games that most people like to play lie somewhere in between the two. And finding the right balance for most people for your audience, is one of the things that a game designer has to do well. So we have to figure out how to put these things in balance. The interesting thing about people who play games of luck, they kind of go into a trance. Like you've seen people at a slot machine, they're also usually like really knackered, but they're like sitting there, they're just drinking, pulling that thing and putting in money. But sometimes they're like really, they're just almost like in this like daze. If you watch somebody play chess, they're also kind of like, it's almost the same face, which is weird, but they're two totally different things. They're like in a trance of like logic, like really trying to process what they're looking at. But that's the engagement aspect that games have. And there's that Zen yin-yang symbol. All right. So one of the last things I want to talk about that makes games really interesting for me to work on is that we don't make them, we don't like write the script and then hand it off and the game gets made by the programmers and the artists. We work with the programmers and the artists. So instead of like designing a blueprint and making these are requirements for the software, and then we hand them down to be implemented, and then we test it, we verify it, and then after that we just maintain it, which is how you build a castle, I guess. Some people build castles this way. I don't know if anybody builds castles anymore, but you get the idea, right? So the way we work in software, because this is not the best way to make software, to make games at all, we also don't want to be these like have all this pressure on us to like think of everything and be these like, I know all the answers, I'm a great game designer, listen to me, here's what we're gonna make. It just doesn't work that way. And anybody who tries to tell you that, they don't know what they're doing. A good game designer is humble. We have to be open to the possibility that our initial ideas are wrong, and we test things constantly. We have to allow ourselves to be wrong and be comfortable with being wrong. Be comfortable with people telling us we're wrong, which can take some discipline. And be open to new ideas. Because when you're making a game for more than just you need to take into account other people's opinions, because chances are you're not just making the game for you. If you want to make a game for yourself and never release it, that's fine, but that's not usually what we do. It's not a very profitable method of making games either. So what we do instead is we start with an idea. Oftentimes it's best to involve the entire team with this idea. It allows them to, again, it allows you to tap into a whole lot of different perspectives. It also makes it so that the team feels like they're involved and they're passionate about what they're making. So you start with the idea phase, go into the prototype phase, go ahead and test it out, maybe make a rough version of it first, then test and analyze it and see if it works, and then go back and decide, once you've tested it and analyzed it, go back to the idea phase and say, okay, what do we do next? What should we do with this prototype now to make it better? This is probably not an alien concept to you guys, because you're all creatives, but it's an important aspect of games, and when you're making games as a game designer, you have to like be an expert at this to really do it well. An iteration, you sort of start, like I said, with kind of a rough idea, you test out something very basic, and then you add the details as you go based on the information that you got. And in this way, game design is like gardening. You sort of plant these seeds, you're involved, you're sort of forcefully trying to make these things grow. They don't just grow on their own, but you sort of water them and get them sun with ideas and testing out new things and involving the playtesters. And sometimes you're the playtester, sometimes you bring in new people, whoever your audience is, to play test it. So these are just a few aspects of what game design is, and I know that it's a little bit of a creative presentation and not really straightforward, this is what you have to do to be a game designer, but I hope this gave you some insight into what I do and what I'm so passionate about, what I've made my career out of. So thank you very much. Ask me anything. Let's start with you in the front row.
I was wondering, how do you test a game without programming it first? Like, how can you test the experience without the actual thing?
So you can program something very rudimentary, something that doesn't take too long to work on. You can either do that with tools yourself, or you can have a programmer do just a really quick prototype. A good programmer will know the difference between like going deep into making a full architecture and just making something quick and dirty. On the other hand, there are other ways that you can test a game. one of the less obvious ways to most people is to do paper prototypes and to use board games and use elements like that. The game that I worked on here in Amsterdam was called Cure Fever, and it's an action game. It's sort of like a Tron snake game. You don't want to touch your tail, and you're with a bunch of other people that are floating around and they don't want to touch their tails. And I actually made a grid on a whiteboard, and I gave everybody a little triangle, and we took turns and we would draw what our moves were going to be, and you could decide how to steer. And so we turned an action game into a turn-based game and tried out some new features like shooting other people or jumping over the lines, which they didn't have in the game before. And we realized that's really fun to do. And it would take 15, 20, 30 minutes to play a game, but that was less than it would have taken for us to like program it, right? So you can learn how to do that other ways as well. You can also, with word games, things like that, you can do things with paper. So yeah, paper prototyping and non-digital prototyping is a tool that we use a lot. Does that answer your question? Cool, what else? There are other hands, yes?
Do you have go-to methods on feeding yourself inspiration for game mechanics and game design ideas?
I do, and there are two things. The first one is I try to play as many games as I can. I play the trendy games, like I've been playing. We were talking about Fortnite. I was talking to Nicola about, I think, and or whatever the new games are, I will play them. At the same time, though, I think it's often a mistake for game developers to too often look at the medium itself, navel gaze, as we say. If games are always looking at other games for inspiration, we're never going to make new ideas. We're never going to get new things. And so for me, the challenge I want to bring to the game development community is stop looking at old games or current games for inspiration. Let's look at the world. We have a whole world of inspiration to draw from: science and art and technology and new ideas, the way cities are laid out. Like, there's just massively. And so the best games do come from people who look outside of games to bring in something new. So for me, it's just, I think as a game designer, I find it beneficial to be a child of the arts and a patron of the arts, and like go to operas and go to ballets, and sometimes sport events if I have to, but really like understand the human experience and how the universe works and constantly be learning. Will Wright, who was the creator of The Sims, he did a really good talk about how when he goes deep into a game, he just surfs Wikipedia just for like learning knowledge. So he made this game Spore. It was kind of a take on evolution, and so he just dove deep into evolutionary theory and understanding primal, the primal process, and that really inspired me. And that's something that's one of the reasons I love game design, is because there's nothing that I can't study that won't help me be a better game designer. Yeah.
Can you name your favorite games of all time, from a game design perspective and just like from gamer
My favorite game of all time. Games of all time.
Video games, yeah.
Oh, geez, I don't know. The problem is that I don't even enjoy games as much anymore, honestly. I know that's a terrible thing to say. It's once you've worked, like if you work at a donut factory, the last thing you want to do when you go home is eat donuts or smell donuts, right? It's the smell of it. So I do it. I still enjoy them a bit, but I don't objectively enjoy them, because when I'm playing a game, I'm always like thinking about those hidden mechanisms and those systems in the background. But for me, there's an indie game called FTL that I really like. For some reason, I play the heck out of it. It's Faster Than Light. It's a space roguelike, if that means anything to you guys. But you can get it on Steam. It's a really, really fun game. But I prefer to play games on my console still. I'm kind of very American in that way. I like to use my computer for work, mostly. I do play some games on my Mac, but the Mac doesn't really run that many games. So I have like an Xbox that I play games on, and so yeah, and I download every mobile game that's somebody tells me I should check out for different reasons. So it's hard for me to say. I think all games have something to offer, and it's a very personal thing, like what individual people like too. So I don't judge either. All right.
You mentioned that you were going along in Mexico and having this art background, and you at a certain point met somebody that sparked this idea of possibility.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you can talk, were you actively seeking this out, or how did this come about?
It was so long ago, I don't remember what was going on, like psychically, what I was thinking or where I was at emotionally. I remember it was when I was working as a bartender, and I was just reading the paper. I actually got this spark of inspiration when I came back to America. But I was reading the paper, and I read about this. It was like an artist profile thing of a local Colorado dude. And I forget his name. I have the article though cut out. It's in one of my scrapbooks at home in Colorado. I feel like I should have it for these presentations because I always talk about that article. But it was just like reading about this guy, and he was like, yeah, I'm an artist and I make art on computers and they're 3D and I do it for video games and movies, and I'm like, he's kind of a freelancer type. It just sounded like he had so much freedom, and I was like, that's what I want. I really want to be able to do that. Does that? But I don't remember if I was like asking the universe for an answer. I may have been, and I have done that before, where I will just sit and meditate and be like, okay, what's my next step? What's the next best thing for me? And understand yourself, understand what you really care about. Because you'll do much better work if you're passionate about what you care about. And to be passionate and understand what you're passionate about, you have to do some inward thinking and look at yourself. And not just always be like chasing the next thing or finding the next opportunity. You have to kind of, I believe a little bit in the law of attraction, kind of try to envision what that next step is going to be, and you'll probably find something like it or adjacent to it. What else?
My buddy and I were both graphic designers and artists, and we're both pretty big in gaming, and we always kind of share ideas with games and stuff. And if someone with our background decided that they wanted to pursue making a game, what's the first step that you would take?
Graphic designers?
Yes.
So I think if you're a visual graphic designer and you want to make a game, you have to ask yourself, do you want to do it by yourself? Like, do you want to have total control over the process from beginning to end? And if you want to do that, I would suggest using tools like Unity or some game development tools that can help you along the way. There's some really great resources on a site that I'm aware of. There's other ones too, but it's called Udemy, U-D-E-M-Y. And I find that when I want to sharpen or acquire new skills, like I learned C# through Unity. And so I find that by applying the knowledge to something, like I want to make a game. Okay, I want to make a game. I'm going to use this tool. I don't know how to use it yet, but I learn the tool as I'm making the game, and I find that I learn the tool better that way, rather than just doing arbitrary tutorials, like Hello World stuff. Like, what do you really learn from that? But if I know that I want to like make a little object that's going to swim, I like go to the community forum, or I do tutorials that are along those lines, and I teach that to myself. Your other option is to find partners who already know how to use those game development tools, and maybe pitch them. Like you can make mock-ups of how you want the game to look. I love doing screenshot mock-ups. That's something I do. I just open up Photoshop or Illustrator, and I make a screenshot of my vision for what the game will look like, with the UI and the HUD elements and everything, and the enemies and the players. And it's just like one moment in the game, how it looks. And that can be a really great way to communicate the idea and get investors even who love that stuff. They're like, oh, you've got a real clear vision here, man. And yeah, it was just a drawing and an illustration you did in a couple weeks. So that's what I would recommend. And find other people in the community that can help you. You in the back.
You mentioned putting time into designing the frustrating parts of the games as well. How much of the time is distributed between those frustrating parts the right way and what is in between?
Frustrating parts. So yeah, so in order to feel engagement in a game, you have to go into a flow state. And a flow state is a term that was coined by a gentleman whose name I could not spell, but I can pronounce. It's Nihai Csikszentmihalyi. And he came up with this concept of a flow state. And it's sort of what I was talking about, how chess players get into a flow state. Strangely enough, slot machine people seem to get into a flow state, but it's a state where you're not aware of the world around you, you're just aware of you and your relationship with that game. And in order to get that flow state just right, we have to straddle that balance between something that's really too difficult and frustrating. We don't want to go there, but we also don't want something to be way too easy. Like, just push the button to continue. Like, no one wants to play that game. Some people do, I guess. The slot machine. But yeah, you really have to figure out how that pacing works. And the time we spend on pacing, I think a little bit of it is intuitive for me at this point. But the best way to know if the pacing is correct is to test it on people and have them play through the experience. And say, where did you get stuck? Or where did you feel like you were bored? And so usually, if they're bored, that means it was too easy. If they were stuck, then it was too hard. It could also be boring because there's just not new content, new fresh content in there. So pacing is a really important thing in games. And yeah, it's 10% of your...
Viable techniques or technologies to do this kind of testing and review, like eye tracking or heart rate variabilities and
Some of the big guys do that, but honestly, it's a little bit overkill, I think. I think if you create the correct survey and you record someone playing the game and you ask them questions, you can test people without going quite to biometric measurements. But there are tricks to doing that and figuring out what are the right questions and figuring out how to pace the gameplay test session so that maybe they stop and answer a few questions about what they just experienced and then play again. You really don't want people to play for more than probably 15 minutes without stopping them and saying, tell me how you're feeling right now, because people will forget how they were feeling if they experience something longer than that. But there's a lot of techniques for it. A book that I recommend about all this stuff that I've talked about is called The Art of Game Design, a book of lenses. It's by a gentleman named Jesse Schell, S-C-H-E-L-L, and he really covers what the art of game design is about in a very good way. And I think the second edition just came out a year ago. I should write my own book, and then I can tell you about my book. Actually, I do have a book in the works that's about the paradoxes of game design, because I think that's something that's really interesting to me. So I'm working on a game called The Zen of Game Design. It talks about all these things that we keep in balance. See that? Any other questions? I'm sure there's more.
Sorry, just last question. We're running out of time, so if you have more questions, you can ask them after the talk, I'm sure.
Oh, no more? Not even one?
One more.
One more. Okay. All right.
I'm just curious about your choice for beta testers for the games. Like you're talking about,
Yeah.
how do you decide who is a beta tester, or is there a website where beta testers can go just specifically for games?
Wow. I don't know if there's a general website where players can go. Kevin, are you aware of one? If you just want to be a beta tester, I don't think there is one. Maybe there should be. That'd be really cool. There are like indie game groups, like on Facebook and stuff like that. If you follow them, then you can. People are always. It's a really valuable resource. If you ever want to reach out to a game developer and say, "Hey, I'll play test your game whenever you want," they're happy to do that. Usually, what we do is we think about who's our demographic. So, are we making a game for people between the ages of 30 and 50, and who, I don't know, who are really hardcore players, or are they really casual players? What kind of platform, obviously, that can determine that as well, mobile or PC or whatever. So we think about who's our demographic, and we focus most of our time on trying to acquire those people. You can also make a game that's for everybody, but when you do that, it's a lot harder to make a game for everybody, right? Because we are all so different. So thank you for that question. Thank you all.
That's it.